They stopped him and humiliated him for fun. Handcuffs, mockery, just a game for the police who had no idea they were dealing with a surgeon rushing to save a life. Everything changed when one of them realized that this life was his own daughter. The contempt in his eyes turned to horror. His voice faltered and his confidence vanished. But what happened next will shock you. Marcus James wasn't just any surgeon. At 36, he was one of the top surgeons in a prestigious hospital in Brooklyn. Every day, he was fighting the clock, risking his sanity, his body, and his life to save people. He was known for his calm under pressure, his sharp hands, and a mind that never stopped running. But tonight, everything was about to fall apart. He had barely enough time to get to the hospital. A little girl needed surgery, and not just any surgery, a life or death situation. Her father? One of the local cops. The pressure was on, and Marcus knew he was the only one who could save her. His mind raced. He grabbed his jacket, threw his stuff in a bag, and slammed the door behind him, ignoring the chill creeping into the evening air. Time was running out. He threw his keys in the ignition, hoping the streets would be clear. The last thing he needed was a delay. Little did he know that night, it wouldn't be the surgery that would keep him up. It would be the nightmare that was about to unfold. The police stop. As he drove down the block near his apartment, 2 squad cars peeled out from the corner and cut him off like they had all the time in the world. He didn't even think about it at first. But then the flashing lights hit his rearview mirror. Panic shot through him. Instinctively, he slammed on the brakes and pulled over to the side of the road. This wasn't new. Hell, this wasn't even his first rodeo. In a fancy car in a predominantly white neighborhood in Brooklyn? Yeah, getting pulled over was practically a part of his daily routine. But tonight, things felt different. The first cop, a young guy with a scruffy face and a bald spot, strutted up to the car like he owned the place. "What the hell do you need?" Marcus snapped, his nerves crackling. He could already hear his heart beating too fast, like it was trying to escape his chest. He was late, and if there was one thing Marcus hated, it was wasting time. The cop didn't flinch. "License and registration." His voice was flat, no emotion. But there was something in his eyes, a smugness. The other cop, a short, stocky guy, leaned against his cruiser, grinning as he pulled out his phone. Marcus didn't miss the way the cop's fingers twitched like he was getting ready to record. He let out a breath, trying to steady his nerves. "Here," Marcus said, reaching into the glove compartment, his hands a little shaky. His brain was already working overtime, calculating how much time he had left to save that kid's life. But before he could even finish handing over the papers, the second cop piped up. "Hey man, you think we didn't notice? You hit the gas back there like you were running from something. What's up with that?" He raised the phone, pointing it straight at Marcus, a grin spreading across his face. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. His palms were sweating now. The world around him suddenly felt smaller, tighter. He could see the cop's eyes glinting in the glow of the streetlights. This wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. This was a game, and Marcus was the target. "Look, I'm in a rush," Marcus said, his voice tight. He tried to keep it together, but it was hard when your whole life was on the line and some guy was filming you like you were a criminal. "I'm headed to the hospital. I've got a surgery I need to perform. A little girl's life is on the line." The cop didn't skip a beat. "Surgery? Oh, really?" The young officer's voice turned mockingly high-pitched as he leaned in, looking at Marcus like he was a joke. "What, you gonna operate on the kid? Or are you just planning on running off with something?" Marcus's stomach flipped. His head felt light. All he could think about was how much he was losing, how every second here was a second that little girl wasn't in the operating room. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm a surgeon. I'm trying to save her life." The cop smirked, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah? Well, it seems to me you're more nervous than you are Dr. Material, buddy. You really think you can just drive off, huh?" He motioned to his partner, who was still filming, then laughed. "This ain't a damn hospital, man. This is the real world. You don't just get to operate and leave." Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. His heart was racing, blood pounding in his ears. Every word felt like a weight pushing him down. I said I'm late. I need to go, Marcus repeated, trying to keep his voice even. But the panic was creeping in, thick and suffocating. Suddenly, the other cop stepped up, his hand on Marcus's door. Without warning, he yanked it open and grabbed Marcus by the shoulder. Out of the car, he ordered. What the hell are you doing? Marcus jerked back in shock. This is insane. The second officer pushed the phone closer to his face, zooming in as if Marcus was some kind of animal at a zoo. Hands behind your back, buddy. You're under arrest. Marcus froze. He couldn't believe it. What was happening? He was trying to save a life. That was all that mattered. And yet here he was, being dragged from his car like he was a criminal. His hands were forced behind his back, the cold bite of handcuffs digging into his skin as the camera continued to roll. You think you're special? You're just another black guy in a fancy car. We got you now, buddy. The first cop sneered, his phone still pointed straight at Marcus's face. Marcus could feel the rage building, but it wasn't enough. His voice cracked as he tried to protest, tried to explain. Everything just felt hopeless. His head was spinning, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if his words would matter. The situation wasn't about truth anymore. It was about power. And he had none. His mind raced, but all that came out was a hollow silence. He could hear the sound of the sirens, the cold night air biting through his jacket. The little girl's life was slipping further and further away with every passing second. And in that moment, Marcus realized this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change everything. Marcus sat in that holding cell, staring at the cold, gray walls. He couldn't make sense of what had just happened. His life had just turned into some kind of weird, twisted acid trip, and it was all too real. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and stale beer, and the harsh fluorescent lights made everything look like a low-budget horror movie. It was hard to even believe this was his life right now. He had always imagined that if anything went wrong, it would be because of a medical complication or a botched surgery. Not this. Not this. He ran his fingers through his hair, trying to clear his mind. I'm a surgeon, damn it, he kept whispering to himself, like saying it would make everything go away. But it didn't. He looked down at his hands, still cuffed behind his back, and felt the burning frustration rising in his chest. He was supposed to be at the hospital, saving lives, not sitting here, locked up like a criminal. His phone was in the hands of the cops, locked tight in their custody, which meant he couldn't even call the hospital to tell them what was happening. That little girl was still waiting for him. Time was running out. Every minute that passed felt like a punch to the gut, but there was something worse than the helplessness. It was the ridiculousness of it all. He had never felt this small, not even in the operating room when the pressure was unbearable. Here, in this cell, he realized just how powerless he really was. He couldn't save the girl. Hell, he couldn't even save himself right now. And then there was Jackson, the cop with the camera, the one who'd filmed everything, the guy who probably got off on seeing Marcus squirm. Jackson hadn't stopped filming since the moment the cuffs went on. He stood there, leaning casually against the bars, holding his phone like he was ready for a live stream. Click, click. Marcus could almost hear the sound of Jackson's thumbs typing out the caption for his Instagram post. #another day in the life, #caught him, #Brooklyn, #black and caught. It made Marcus want to scream, but there was no point. What could he possibly say? He was stuck. He was just another black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. A guard finally came into the cell, his boots stomping against the concrete floor. He didn't even look at Marcus at first, just shuffling some papers in his hand. Then, out of nowhere, he dropped a small note through the bars. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he read the words. You're expected at the hospital. You need to get there. It doesn't matter to us, but we're not going to stop you. His mind exploded. His head spun. For a moment, he couldn't even process it. Who was this from? What was going on? He had to get to that damn hospital. Every second that passed was a second too late. His hands shook as he pressed the note against the cold metal bars, trying to make sense of it. But there wasn't time for that. There was no time to figure out who was trying to help him. He couldn't think. All he could think about was the girl, the patient. She needed him. Just as he started to gather his thoughts, a familiar voice echoed through the hallway, the last voice he ever wanted to hear again. "Well, well, well," the lieutenant from the street said, stepping into view. The same smug grin stretched across his face like he just won the lottery. "You really thought you were a hero, huh?" He stepped closer, his boots echoing in the otherwise quiet room. "You're not a hero. You're just another guy who thinks he's too good for the law. Just another drug dealer who got caught." I'd say Marcus's heart froze. He couldn't believe it. This was his worst nightmare. Not just being trapped in this cell, not just the fear that his patient was dying, but hearing this bullshit from this man who was supposed to be enforcing the law, who was supposed to protect people like him. The lieutenant was grinning now, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can just drive around like you own the place, huh? You think we didn't notice? You think we didn't know who you were?" He leaned in, getting in Marcus's face. "No, you're just another black man trying to escape the reality of what you are, and now you're stuck." Every word the lieutenant said felt like a slap in the face. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. If there was ever a moment Marcus felt like the system had truly broken him, this was it. His hands were bound, and he couldn't do a damn thing. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a surgeon. He was just some guy who got caught in the gears of a machine that didn't care about him, or his life, or the little girl who needed him. The lieutenant stepped back, still smiling. "You're nothing special. Get used to it. The sooner you realize that, the easier this will be for you." It was like the ground had just been pulled out from under him. Marcus didn't know how to react. How could he fight this? The system was too strong, too impenetrable. He was just another guy, stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was no way out of this. And yet, in the back of his mind, a spark flickered. It was small, but it was there. He was a surgeon. He had saved lives before. This wasn't over. Maybe the system had him now, but it didn't have to keep him. He looked up at the lieutenant, his eyes hard. "You don't get it," he said quietly. "I'm not going to let this stop me." But the lieutenant just chuckled, shaking his head. "We'll see about that, won't we?" Marcus stood there, feeling like his life had already been written out for him. Arrested, humiliated, and on the verge of losing everything. It seemed like this was his routine. A black guy in a fancy car, caught in the trap of the street. Days like this were just part of the grind. But then something shifted. The cop standing in front of him suddenly took a step back, his face drained of color, and for a moment, Marcus thought the guy was about to faint. "Wait, you're Dr. James?" His voice trembled like he'd just seen a ghost. "My daughter. She's on the operating table." Marcus froze. The cop, who had just been ready to film him, now looked like he'd been hit by a moral avalanche. He looked at Marcus like he was the only person who could save his world. And in that instant, he realized just how badly he'd fucked up. All the jokes, all the sarcasm, gone in a flash. This guy wasn't just a cop. He was a father, and now it seemed like his daughter's life depended on Marcus. Without another word, the cop stepped back, practically begging for forgiveness with his eyes. He stuttered out an apology, his whole demeanor crumbling. Marcus, completely calm, locked eyes with him and said, "Everyone's just doing their job. Laws are for everyone, not just you and your family." And with that, Marcus turned and walked away. He didn't need to say more. The man who had been king of the street just minutes ago was now a man on fire, burning with shame. If I were Marcus, I'm not sure I'd keep my cool like that. Imagine being treated like dirt, then having the guy who did it realize you're the only one who can save his kid. Ever had a moment like that? Drop your thoughts below. Your opinion matters. This story's here to shine a light on real problems and hopefully make things better.